Aye lads, just wanted to update you all on my quarantine diaries. Just some observations from when I'm going out for my 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day during my quarantine. For the last 24 hours, I've been thinking about artificial intelligence. For some reason, it's been in my head about an advancement Apple made a few years ago, whereby a smell came from the phone. I could be wrong, it could have been a computer. I can't remember what the smells were, but for some reason a refresher suite sticks in my mind. They had mastered it with a handful of aromas because they wanted to replicate the human senses. It was a major breakthrough for them to see if it comes to fruition. At the time I was super fascinated by this and I didn't understand why it wasn't all over the news. It doesn't sound like a big deal on the one hand, because smelling a refresher from your phone is a cool but whatever situation. But at the same time, one has to admire and appreciate that the smell had to be written as a computer code in order for the smell to come out the phone. Where do you even start with that? Can you imagine being a coder and your boss at Apple comes to your desk with a refresher bar and says, "Smell that"? You smell it, then he, she is like, "I want that smell to come out of the phone so people can smell it. Can you make the code?" Bear in mind, I've not gone down the rabbit hole in depth enough to consider how a speaker ultimately has the same function as an item to emit an aroma. That's your whole other conversation. I'm still stuck in stage 1 of writing a code that replicated the smell of one item. Surely, there is an infinite amount of probabilities regarding the code for a particular item. But they found it. For me, this should have been a question that created discourse for decades to come amongst coders and techs. For example, we have quantum physicists who study and explore quantum mechanics and atomic and subatomic particles. A computer in its code, programs, safety and security is like a little mini universe inside a box, much the same as an atom or a subatomic atom. The difference being that atoms existed and the code didn't. With that in mind, the next part of the equation was to transmit a smell made from code out of a speaker. Yeah, now do you see where I'm going with this? No. How's this even remotely possible? Seriously? But they wrote the code and the child smelling it said it did indeed smell exactly like said item. For me, this was remarkable, complete magic and the stuff what makes your body tense up with excitement and do a wee bounce. I can recall the excitement like it was yesterday, and I was telling everyone who would listen. I was so excited. At the time, you see, I only shot and appreciated the magic. I didn't think of the ramifications of how this could be used negatively by the wrong people with the same skill set. As my rabbit hole would have it, the years have gone on and I've considered how this could be used to create a totalitarian society, or for the evolution of our species, which would be forced on us opposed to it being a natural or voluntary process. And I've also wondered at great length on the possibility of this being done with a virus or disease. And this was prior to the situation we now find ourselves in. Now I'm not for 1 minute saying that Apple would do that. I'm merely giving consideration to the fact that a refresher bar didn't have a computer code, and some genius at Apple wrote a code. The code didn't produce a smell out of the phone that had a similar aroma as one would expect. And even then, what are the chances? The genius produced the code that replicated the smell exactly. Moreover, this didn't create discourse among experts for decades as one would expect. It was achieved in a mere few years. Let me just highlight, Apple's reason for doing this was positive. I'd be lying if I wrote something stating I could remember, because I can't recall it in entirety. But I recall their reason was thoughtful and would help a lot of people, i.e. autism. Their goal was to replicate all of the senses because they had a vision of helping in said area. It was truly remarkable. But going back to sending a disease down the phone, for me, the way pathogens are documented already in computers, whereby they have a unique signature in their DNA or RNA. 4 years ago, scientists perfected adding data to human DNA. The terms they use to discuss the process are all computer terms, or terms from the field of quantum physics. In short, and in kids' terms, the aim was to write on DNA RNA. One reason was to see if this could be embedded in the genetics of said family descendants, in turn allowing the message to be read by scientists in the future. This message was 100 bytes of data, which was stated to be the equivalent of 2 lines of the alphabet. Let's for a moment consider this deeply. DNA can't be seen with the human eyeball, and a grain of sugar on a worktop can. We are literally talking about writing 2 lines of the alphabet onto DNA, RNA, and it's smaller than a grain of sugar. In fairness, what they didn't state was that if they formulated a code sequence whereby a shape, for example, represents a specific message, or is it like the I Ching? What? Given they didn't give clarity on this, the picture I'm seeing in my head is something smaller than a grain of sugar. Grain of rice is the expression. Having the alphabet written on it twice over, but that may not be the case. They could have made up equations that gave a message in written word, yet it's smaller. Who knows why they left that part out? But they made it very clear that they can write and store 100 bytes of data on DNA RNA. Secondly, the purpose was to allow the signature of the DNA, 100 bytes of date, to copy and paste. What does this mean? So the way I interpret that was if they encode the DNA RNA with the code for a vaccine, for example, then when a pathogen attacks DNA RNA, copies and pastes the vaccine code onto the pathogen to surmount the virus/bacteria. Seriously, how amazing is this? But, and there is a but, if they can do it for good, someone with extreme views or bad intentions could use it for bad. Ultimately, that means that it's completely possible to upload 100 bytes of code for a disease whereby it can be copied and pasted onto the healthy DNA RNA to spread the disease. What's really interesting though is technology is trying to become human by replicating our sensory abilities, whereas science is trying to become more technological by uploading data in bytes and copying and pasting messages and signatures of DNA, RNA, and no doubt in the future it will be the signature of pathogens too. Fuck me. That's all for now then, bye!